Hi everyone. Today we're going to go over how to set up your calculation and run it. And so in the transactions page, if you want to configure your calculation settings, you can go to the configuration wheel, which is next to your calculate button on the top right of your screen. If you go ahead and click that, you'll see all your calculation configuration options. So what you can set up in the first option here is your calculation mode. Your calculation mode is the accounting methodology that you're running your cost basis flow with. In my example, I have FIFO set up, but I can change it for LIFO, HIFO, any of these accounting methodologies. You fully control this. The trailing of your calculation, the way this works, if you're doing a trailed start, you're calculating cost basis since the beginning of time in your ledger through the end financial period that you select, whether you filter for one or you don't. If you're running trailed continue, what this means is the cost basis calculation will start from a specific point forward. So what is the scenario you would use this? Well, if you're doing one tax year in FIFO and then the next tax year in LIFO, for example, these are two different accounting methodologies, but you want to continue the cost basis flow. So that would be a use case for trailed continue. Now, untrailed is if you don't want to save the cost basis data that you calculate for testing purposes, the vast majority of the time, you would most likely be under trailed start unless you had a change of accounting methodology, then perhaps trailed continue. The next point is audit logs. The audit logs is a nice feature because if you enable audit logs, every disposition that you have, you'll see the inventory references to see where the cost basis comes from. To discuss cost basis flow, you either have per asset or universal method. On the other hand, you can do per connection or per account. So that would be the equivalent of running, in this case, FIFO, per connection, per account, per wallet that you have connected in Cryptoworth versus universal. So just as a reminder, universal method means you'll have a global token inventory of where the cost basis will flow from, and per connection will segregate that inventory by connection. So this is very important to configure early on to your experience in Cryptoworth. Going over the advanced options for your calculation, if you click this button here, you'll be able to see other checkboxes of options where you can customize your calculation. For example, if you want your tax lots, then you would select calculate tax lots. This will break up your capital gain loss by short-term versus long-term gain loss and generate your tax loss reports. So this is what you would typically see in company tax forms like 1099-DA in the United States or other forms worldwide for crypto cost basis reporting. Moving on to calculate NFT cost basis. If you care about calculating cost basis for your NFT assets, then you can have this checkbox on. This is defaulted to on, so you don't have to worry about it. If you want to omit NFTs from your reporting, you can deselect it. Moving on to asset-based calculation. This is a checkbox where you can optimize the calculation of many tokens. If you have a portfolio of a significant amount of unique tokens, running the cost basis by asset is going to be an efficient way to initiate your cost basis calculation. So this is the checkbox for that option. You can also recalculate your dispositions and acquisitions if they have financial values that were calculated from a previous cost basis calculation. This is a unique option if you want to override previously calculated data in your ledger. Now that we've covered all the settings within the calculation configuration, we'll now navigate to your entity level calculation settings. So we actually have more specific configurations that you can do at the entity level. So let's go ahead and go there. So we're going to entity settings, and under entity settings, we'll look for calculation. So under the calculation is where you can see more specific entity level calculation options. So for example, you'll see the latest version of your calculation. You'll see also whether or not you want to auto transfer cost basis for certain transaction events. So if you turn this checkbox on, what this option will do for your portfolio or for your entity is that the cost basis calculation will auto transfer the proceeds of the disposing asset to the cost basis of the acquiring asset for trades and swaps. So if you want that to be automated, you want this checkbox on. Now you have certain configurations that you can set up for fees at cost, fair market value, proceeds. If you want the fees to be in the proceeds of your dispositions. You have a lot of configurations you can do, which of course can alter your capital gain or loss liability. This is something that you would want to talk to an accounting professional. Here we go. Include buy, event, fee values, and cost basis. This is a very specific scenario. Again, it can affect capital gain or loss. Running balances. This is a nice feature to have. If you enable running balances, you will have a running balance column in your transactions page that you can leverage to see the running balance of tokens per connection. So you can see what the running balance is at every acquisition and disposition. We have a feature called taxability sanity check. So what this means is if the system is automatically creating a, let's say, non-taxable behavior, for example, internal transfers are automatically tracked, the behavior will be automatically non-taxable. If you classify the transaction as something that's taxable, there will be a conflict of behavior, taxability behavior, and the flag will appear. If you have this checkbox on, this is defaulted to on for your convenience. We also have the ability to include fiat transactions. If you have fiat transactions in your ledger, Cryptoworth can also calculate cost basis for your fiat transactions. If you want that on, you would want this checkbox checked and saved. We also have, finally, the override start date. So what this means is if you select a start date in your transactions page and run the cost basis calculation, Cryptoworth will consider the inventory before that start date in order to continue the cost basis flow forward. If you turn off that checkbox in the settings that we saw earlier, what will happen if you use a start date and an end date, the cost basis calculation would only focus into that between period and the inventory in that period. Meaning if you have inventory before that period that needs to be disposed, let's say in the period of your choosing, then you will have negative balance deviations if you don't have that checkbox on. So that checkbox is on by default for your convenience. For the override start date, what this means is if you have a start date and end date for your cost basis calculation, your financials will always show the financials of that period. However, because this is turned on by default, the inventory flow from before the start date that you filter for in the transactions page will not be interrupted because this is on by default. If you turn it off, the inventory from prior to the start date that you filter for in your cost basis calculation will not be considered. And of course, that can create inventory issues in the period that you're reporting for. Now, if you do want it that way, you can deselect this override start date option.